Thank you for being here today. Would you tell us your name and what branch of service you were in and how long you were in?
Richard Gallaher. I was in the Army, and I spent 10 years in a combination between active duty and active reserve. So I went in June of 71, and I got out in October of 81.
And where is home for you?
Home is between Phoenix, Arizona, and Los Angeles, California.
And you joined the service. Tell us why you did that.
Well, they were still pulling numbers when I was getting out of high school, and I didn't want to get drafted. And I also didn't have enough money for college because college was very expensive, and I didn't have enough money for room and board in college. And so I talked to recruiters and got the best deal I could get, which was a guarantee of almost a year in school as a satellite communications ground terminal technician, and then a guaranteed tour in Germany. So I figured, hey, I'm going to skip Vietnam. I got it nailed.
And what happened there?
Oh, well, got out of school and they says, well, you know, the opening slot we had in Germany is closed and we don't have room for you in Germany. So you can get out if you want, or you can join in our unit in Fort, I call it Fort We Got You, but it's Arizona, the big base in Arizona. And so I joined them there.
And when did you go overseas to Vietnam?
Well, initially I was with the unit. We were tactical. They moved us to California. We went to Ethiopia in '74, where we closed down the base in Asmara. And then we went to Vietnam. It was very secretive. They put us all in civilian clothes. We got a civilian clothing allowance. And we went over on Good Friday of '75 and left Vietnam May 2nd of '75.
Wow. So tell me, if you'd like to share, I hear you've got a few stories you'd like to share about your time in Vietnam. If you'd like to share those, we'd love to hear them.
So Vietnam was interesting because, like I said, we were all in civilian clothes, and when we went over, the first thing we started hearing on the TV and radio ads is, if you're in civilian clothes, you're a spy and you will be treated like a spy. And so we heard those, but essentially we weren't supposed to divulge anybody's name or rank or salute. We were supposed to be acting like full civilians. So we went over and we were first on the far side of the base in older wooden billets. But when Congress announced they weren't going to fund the war anymore, the South Vietnamese who were fighting with the Americans started shooting at us. Wow. And so they started shooting randomly at the barracks. And so they decided to move us to in the base to where the theater is, and we made our beds on the floor and hung out there. And when we were hanging out there, we got lots of rocket fire. So we were taking rocket fire. Our job was to keep the satellite system up and running, and we didn't care who was on it. We couldn't tell South Vietnamese from North Vietnamese. So if it was Vietnam voice, we just let it go. We ran 12 voice channels over to the States, and we were privileged because we were able to make calls home. But of course, we had a monitor in Hawaii that would try and beep out anything that was proprietary or secret. So we were there a while, and then April 4th, just a couple days ago, was the anniversary. They started flying round-eyed babies out. Round-eyed babies were American and Vietnamese babies, and so they would have round eyes. And they were an outcast, and so they were in the orphanages, and they filled the orphanages. And so they started flying round-eyed babies out But on April 4th, they had a C-5A, and that's the biggest aircraft I think mankind knows. It was packed on the top layer, which is the place for people to sit, but also on the bottom layer with babies. And they didn't have enough carrying cases for babies, so they got U.S. mail plastic bins and put the babies all in plastic bins. The aircraft took off, and the back door was blown off, and it lost its airworthiness and crashed, and took out, I don't know, something like 100 babies, and about 35 American women. Now, these American women were not military. They were American women that worked for a defense attaché agency. And they thought, hey, a free trip home. Let's go home, see something, get some Americanizing, and come back. And anyways, we lost 35, the most women we ever lost in one setting in that war. So that was quite disastrous. It impacted the Operation Baby List substantially. It impacted the evacuation of civilians and military people substantially. They eventually closed the air base, and the only way we could get out was chopper. Now, everybody that writes everything about the evacuation of Vietnam, they write about the evacuation of the embassy, but they do not write about the Defense Attestation Agency. We had tennis courts that they plowed down and they turned into a landing pad, and they brought in these great big huge Marine Corps choppers that the tail drops down in the back. And when it was time for us to evacuate, they dropped the tail down. We filled up and took off to one of a dozen different ships. I was sent to the Mount Vernon. Many of them were sent to Coral Ridge, and et cetera, et cetera. Our destination was the Philippines, where we were allowed transient to go onto the base and fly off the base. So we were there several days, and they arranged a flight home. Our crew got together, and we flew home to Hawaii, which was our main station. Before the trip to Vietnam, my wife and I would always struggle over who gets the mail. She was running to the mail, and she broke her ankle. Not a big deal, but she, when I left, was 6 months pregnant, and we were now on the second floor, and she couldn't go up and down the stairs very well, so she had to go up and down the stairs on her butt. My son was born, David was born on June 5th of 75, so you can see how close that was. Mm-hmm. And of course, when we went, we couldn't tell anybody where we went.
That was scary, I'm sure, for
especially for her, yes.
Yes.
Very young lady,
Yes.
At 20.
Wow, that's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that. So when you got back to the States and you got out of the service, what did you do after that?
Well, in that run, I left in December, went to Washington State, went to school, and was part of the active reserve, the 81 Tactical out of Seattle. And so I went to school, and essentially the money ran out, and so I joined back in 78, 79, joined back in, worked at the Fort Gordon, and I was an instructor at Fort Gordon for satellite communications. So I got out in 81 because I was due to go on an assignment to Korea. And I said, nope, don't want that. I got babies at home. I had joined a company called DCC, and they had great facilities. They were a good company. And I was able to leverage a job up with Eastman Kodak and them. Eastman Kodak was in Rochester, so I said, no, I think I'll go with you guys. Nice thing about the DC area is telecommunications jobs are all over the place. So anyways, I joined DCC and I was a field engineer installing satellite communications for companies around the country.
And how long did you do that?
Many, many years. Beginning of my travel really spiked while I was a civilian. I traveled throughout Europe and Asia, and would go out and teach the systems. And then after that, I was an advisor for the FAA, where I worked on something called voice switch communication systems. And then I worked for Boeing in future combat systems and Harris. And then so there I was part of a team and working onward and upward. In, I don't know, about 20-ish, we got moved here. Harris moved us here. When I left Harris, I went to work as kind of like a sole proprietor, but we were single contributors. I would go out and do security audits. So I did security audits for some of the larger firms that you may know of, and essentially travel around and ask questions and do research and make sure that they have all of their information right and they have all their security things in place. So I retired as a cybersecurity auditor back in 22.
Wow, that's fabulous. What a career.
Yeah, all over the world.
Yes. Wow, that's incredible. And it started with your work in the military being able to kind of launch you off into an ending in communications.
Right.
So that's incredible. That's amazing. What advice would you give to someone who was just going into the service now?
Well, I give advice. I actually contribute on LinkedIn, but it's like, do you want a real job? And then it's like, do real work.
Right.
You can't have a virtual job and get real money. But my advice is start at the bottom and work your way up. Make sure you can get your hands dirty. Many people aren't willing to get their hands dirty, so they're not willing to do the work. And so I tell people that are starting out in security to get a certification and to get another certification and another certification and work their way up with the certification branches, not as a quick 40-hour take an exam, but do the work. I was awarded something called a CISSP, which is a Security Information Person, in 2011, but I didn't do it until I had 5 years of experience under me. So you don't go take a cram exam and think you're going to be making big money. Work your way up.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And what advice, what would you like to share with other veterans that are, just retiring or trying to find their next purpose in life?
Okay, I address that, but I have, bottom line is I'm telling people before they get out to make sure they contact the VA for disability. Mine was delayed almost 5 years. It took me a 10-year fight to get mine because they didn't recognize that I was in Vietnam.
Wow.
So, but I'm telling everybody when they're getting out to make sure they have hobbies, to be engaged. They're going to lose their social support system, and so they may need to get engaged with organizations like the VFW and so on, to be engaged and to make sure they have a good social support system.
That's great advice. Absolutely. You have a lot of camaraderie when you're in the service, and so it's important, like you're saying, when you get out to be able to have that outside as well.
Yes, I agree.
Well, thank you so much for coming today and sharing your stories and just sharing about your life. And thank you so much for your service.
I appreciate it. Thank
Yes.
you very much. Very
Absolutely.
kind.
Thank you.